So when you consider the choice that Dr. Henry Louis Gates made, not to bow his head, but to resist the racism of the Cambridge police, and this wasn't even done at a demonstration in full view of everyone, but he got arrested in his own home on July 16th, it is all the more heroic. Because given another place, especially in the South, or even another time, like the pre-civil rights movement, there is no doubt that Professor Gates would have been brutally beaten, jailed, or even lynched. Under this capitalist society where institutionalized racism reigns supreme, if a person of color expresses any anger towards the cops or the prison guards or the courts or the judges, you are in essence resisting the status quo. You are resisting oppression. And it took a very well-respected, established Harvard professor to cause a fiery national debate to drive this point home. Bob Herbert, the Black New York Times columnist, wrote a powerful editorial last week called "Anger Has Its Place" in defense of Gates on August 1st. And I want to read just a short section from it. Quote, "The very first lesson that should be drawn from the encounter between Mr. Gates and the arresting officer, Sergeant James Crowley, is that Professor Gates did absolutely nothing wrong. He did not swear at the officer or threaten him. He was never a danger to anyone. At worst, if you believe the police report, he yelled at Sergeant Crowley. He demanded to know if he was being treated the way he was being treated because he was black. It was the police officer, Sergeant Crowley, who did something wrong in this instance. He arrested a man who had already demonstrated to the officer's satisfaction that he was in his own home and had been minding his own business, bothering no one. Sergeant Crowley arrested Professor Gates and had him paraded off to jail for no good reason, and that brings us to the most important lessons to be drawn from this case. Black people are constantly being stopped, searched, harassed, publicly humiliated, assaulted, arrested, and sometimes killed by police officers in this country for no good reason. Black people need to roar out their anger at such treatment, lift up their voices, and demand change. Anyone counseling a less militant approach is counseling self-defeat, end quote. But the fact that the first black president of the United States defended a black professor who was clearly a victim of police misconduct was a situation that the police could not swallow. Obama was viewed by the Cambridge police as if he was an, quote, uppity, end quote, black man who didn't know his, quote, unquote, place. The Cambridge police held a press conference the day after Obama had his press conference, demanding that Obama apologize, and also demanded that the first black governor of Massachusetts, Deval Patrick, apologize to the police for his defense of Gates. This demand gives a whole new meaning to the phrase, quote, racist arrogance. And the fact that Obama felt the need to backtrack on his remarks and to actually go so far as to invite Crowley and Gates to the White House for a beer reinforces the fact that in the eyes of the police, the most deadliest domestic armed force in capitalist society, that Obama is first and foremost a black man, a second-class citizen who just happens to be the president of the most powerful imperialist country. Will a beer with the boys put this fire out? I doubt it, for it ignores what happens every day in dozens of states to countless men and women who don't have Harvard PhDs or friends in the White House. The sad truth is being black in America is akin to being born low caste in India, where separate and unequal rules remain despite promises in their constitution. Obama's election hasn't changed reality, but may mask it by providing cover for the ugly things that blacks endure in a nation where the elites claim a false post-racialism. A few brewskis ain't going to change that either, end quote. Comrades and friends, with Gates resisting this arrest, his action put a national spotlight on racial profiling, especially police brutality, on a level comparable to the savage beating of Rodney King by cops 17 years ago, and whose acquittals helped spark the LA rebellion. The role of the police in the U.S. is supposed to be feared on the one hand and revered on the other hand by the masses. That's why the reaction to Gates asking them if he was being racially profiled was such a shock to their sensibilities. They are used to getting another kind of reaction, and that is for the victims to be subdued and humbled. The police cannot tolerate having their authority being challenged by the masses, and now they are afraid and freaked out that the masses will eventually follow Gates' example of resisting racial profiling. I don't think it's a coincidence at all that the racist right wing has labeled Gates as a racist. They have created an atmosphere that has encouraged death threats against Gates and has tried to isolate him from the general epidemic of police brutality and racial profiling, especially in the midst of this deepening economic crisis. Just yesterday, the government officially announced the loss of almost 250,000 jobs in July. And this is on top of at least 4 million jobs that have been lost since the latest economic crisis was ignited by the subprime mortgage scandal a couple of years ago. The right wing is turning up the heat and scapegoating our class sisters and brothers for this crisis, especially immigrants, black youth, and other sectors of society that have been marginalized and demonized by the repressive state, including the mainstream media. It is all about divide and conquer of the multinational working class, especially with the ruling class wielding the various weapons of white supremacist ideology in order to keep monopoly capital rule in place. Capitalist reforms and capitalism itself has no permanent answers to the mounting unemployment, the underemployment, the lack of health care for at least 50 million people, skyrocketing college tuition, homelessness, and much more. Because the capitalist mode of producing everything that we need in society to thrive is based on making a profit, not meeting human needs. Capitalism is not only inhumane, but it is unnatural for a way of life for human beings, for other species, and for the planet. And because police brutality and racial profiling are byproducts of capitalism and class society, they must be opposed and fought against locally, statewide, and nationally. Every one of us is being impacted by this economic crisis. So wouldn't it serve all of our interest to put aside whatever political differences we may have to unite and join together to build a powerful movement to fight for jobs, healthcare, education, housing, and much more for us all, and not for the few extremely wealthy? Isn't this a logical action to take? Isn't it more of us than it is of the bosses and bankers who make life and death decisions behind closed doors on who keeps their jobs or not, which factories and plants stay open or not, who gets an education and health care and who doesn't? Unfortunately, the ruling class is more than aware of the potential of building this kind of class unity against them. But the working class as a whole does not have this type of class consciousness yet. This is a temporary situation. This is why the handful of multi-billionaires and billionaires need the cops to keep social order by occupying whole communities and terrorizing people of color in disproportionate numbers, especially black and Latino youth. With every struggle for economic justice, there has to be a demand to fight against racism, along with other special oppressions, because it is the key to building unity and solidarity within our class.